Welcome to the Fire from Two Windows podcasts, where we hope to take some deep dives and interesting discussions pertaining to the fire service. We'll be discussing training and tactics. We will also have some discussions with a broad spectrum of firefighters discussing their lives and fire service career. Your hosts, Matt and myself, Lou, are always looking to improve our trade and pass our knowledge along. Tonight, we wanted to start with somewhat a controversial topic in the fire service: vertical ventilation.
Yes, the vertical ventilation, big debacle.
Yeah.
Seems that a lot of people they either love it or hate it. There's not a lot of in between.
Yeah, if you listen to other fire service podcasts, some are all about going to the roof. And when we talk about the roof in our area, it's 90%. I mean, you can even go probably higher than that. We're talking residential structures with peak roofs. So I pulled a definition from a major fire service text, one that's used throughout the country. So the definition of vertical ventilation, so I'm paraphrasing here: vertical ventilation creates a natural pathway for hot gases, unburned particles of combustion, and steam to escape quickly and easily. So I don't know why there's such a issue with some major fire departments where they refuse to go to peak roofs. I mean, we do it here. They do it major cities across the Northeast. Just one particular city seems to shy away from it. I don't know what the deal with that is. I know in my experience, when that roof is popped open, life gets a lot easier. I mean, I know it's a dangerous thing, but the fire service is dangerous.
It is. I mean, I have a heck of a lot less experience than you do with it. But from what I've experienced and then what we teach out there in the academies and everything, it seems to kind of be more of an afterburner thing. When you're going straight at a fire, all right, first arriving units, those first few, depends on which side of the fence. We see a lot of less experience-based agencies and organizations go, hey, I need somebody on a hand line and I need somebody getting to the roof, cutting that hole. That vertical ventilation seems to really work under certain set of conditions. All right, so one, tactical ventilation. So we're dumping a hand line on the fire and we're opening up some sort of ventilated space so that we can clear all of them hot gases. There's other, some of these agencies, they may not get their hand line in place, so they just go straight to a vertical. All right, so condition one being, do we have a hand line or water flowing on that fire? Condition two is, hey, where is that roof in relationship to the fire room? I think fully engulfed, 2-story, 3-story, it doesn't matter. Okay, different subject. Do we actually need to be ventilating? It may already be self-ventilated. But if it's a first floor fire and it's a 2-story house, do we go straight to vertically ventilating? Because now you got that hot gas traveling somewhere that may not need to. So
Right.
do we try a different approach to ventilation?
And you bring up, a lot of these, you see a lot of departments, they send guys straight to the roof on, there's roofs that don't need to be cut. You can agree with that, like a 1-story rancher, a kitchen fire, unless that fire has gotten to that void space, the roof doesn't need to be cut. Ventilation can be handled with horizontal ventilation all day. But, in our area, we have, called Dutch colonial. Some people call them craftsman houses. These are these 2.5-story houses with livable space in the attic. And there's a natural pathway. Some of these houses have a door to the stairway up to the attic. Some of them don't have a door to the stairway to the attic. But if there's a livable space in that half story, or even the Cape Cods that we have that are 1.5 stories, there's no door to the attic space or that livable space in that half story. That roof has to be taken quickly, especially on these halves, the 2.5s and the 1.5s when they have knee walls. If the fire gets in the knee wall, the only way to vent that knee wall is to cut the roof open.
Yeah,
I mean,
ultimately,
because that's
and it's not a traditional like a box cut or 4x4. You kind of almost have to do like a mini trench cut.
right,
So this is going back.
right.
This is like a Cape Cod. I'm thinking of. I live in a Cape Cod, and I grew up in one as well. So when you run a small strip, you got to go right from the peak all the way down to the roof line, just so that you capture that upper breezeway, or excuse me, not breezeway, but the cross vent, your actual space, your living space, and then that knee wall. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Right. If you can picture these half stories, these 2.5 Dutch colonials or 1.5 Cape Cods, there's a cockloft or a void space in that tiny triangle at the peak of the roof. And then there might be 8 foot of the ceiling where if you sink that saw, you might have just the spacing of the roof rafters and insulation. And then you have that void space where the knee walls are. And fire can be in there the whole time. And if you don't vent that, where's it going to go?
Right,
Cape Cods,
right.
they usually have maybe one or two windows on each side of the gable ends. That's not enough to vent that's that area. And the Dutch colonials, you might have one of those eyelet windows that looks like a half circle. You might
Hmm.
have, some dormers up there, but then you got to worry about throwing, a significantly larger ladder. A 24 might reach it, might not, depending on, you know, where the ladders are. Do you have a porch in the back? Is there a garage that you have to worry about? Now you got to worry about taking a 28 or a 35 to the rear of the structure. Some of these capes, these Dutch colonials that we have that we have on the east side of town, they're right on top of each other, and you really can't throw a 35 or a 28 in the driveway because the angle just isn't right.
Right.
So, cutting the roof it is a go-to tactic for us. And I don't, do, have you discussed with, guys out your way? I mean, I know the city where you live, the larger city where you live, they cut the roof. The larger city where we work, they cut the roof. Where we work, we cut the roof. You go one city east of us, they have companies that just go up and cut the roof. You go a little bit farther south than us, and they don't go to roofs. They just go to flat roofs, and they kind of shy away from the peak roofs. And I don't know if it's I really don't know what it is. What's the disconnect
I don't
with it?
know. It's got to be a regional thing. Yeah, maybe it starts from the seed that's planted. All right, so going academy or firefighter one, whatever that may be, when they first start discussing it, and then from there, it's just a cultural thing that happens by region. Yeah, I live out of town from where we work, in the city that's closest to me. They have these. Pretty much, they're all a majority of their houses inside that city are 2.5 story homes. Now, from the front of it, the A side, you're looking at the short end of the house. It's long and deep house, super tall, not a lot of space between them. So it'll be like one garage. So yeah, they naturally set up to, hey, I got to send one crew up to the roof because of that pitch of that roof, that steep pitch. It takes a whole crew putting up them ladders, getting up there, and then cutting. So they tend to do either strips, peak cuts, or cutting off of that roof ladder. Just some sort of 4x4 hole or something. But they got to get into that space to ventilate. But everything is shooting straight up because again, it's narrow and tall. So it's essentially a chimney. It could be just purely, instead of just region, it could be the the building construction of these houses. Um, a lot of where we work, we have ranch or a split level. It can still be multiple levels. Not just a single story ranch, but more like a colonial. I don't know. Does that construction dictate that need?
Yeah, and
I
you
can't
go to
say.
a 2-story colonial, vent the roof is low on the priority unless it gets up into the attic space. Because that 2-story, that attic space is it's just a void space. There's, you might have a hatch in a closet to get up there. You might have a scuttle door in one of the bedrooms. And unless the fire breaches that door, breaches that hatch, and breaches the drywall and gets up in the attic, you don't got to worry about venting the roof. But
Right.
these 1.5s and 2.5s, I think vertical ventilation is higher on the priority because one thing I've noticed, it vertical ventilation to me is making the fire do what you want it to do in those structures. If you vent, if you're horizontally ventilating, behind the fire and, in front of the hose line, behind the fire, you're trying to push that fire out the vent point. And
Right.
if you're trying to make a push up to the second floor on these 2.5s or 1.5, you're trying to channel that smoke up and out the roof. You're trying to make that fire do what you want it to do. You're dictating the conditions using ventilation. And I think vertical ventilation is safer for the interior crews, because how many NIOSH reports or how many LODDs have happened because horizontal ventilation was either done at the wrong time or at the wrong place. And then we draw on fire on top of guys and then they get burned. Where vertical ventilation, I think you have a little bit, you got some give and take, or you got to get a more leeway because all the hot gases are going up. So, you're not drawing the fire on anybody. That's just my take. I think vertical ventilation is on these 2.5s and 1.5s is, should be up in the priority for our command structure to, send guys to the roof. Especially, you have these, some of these interior chimneys that we have where the chimneys run the inside of the house. And we've had a string of chimney fires in our district and, in some neighboring districts where the fire started in the firebox, the fire breached the firebox because of an old masonry style chimney. And then it got up into the structure and it just ran the structure of the chimney. And now instead of fire, we might have fire on one floor, but now it's ran the chimney chase. And now we have fire on 3 floors. It might not be a significant amount of fire, but how are you going to vent that? Can't vent it horizontally.
We just had a job like that too. A couple, what was it? I think it was on my shift, maybe 3 shifts ago. We went to a neighboring district. That's exactly how it started. It was in the firebox, broke into the wall, ran up, up the chase. So it was kind of interesting because they had at some point, it looked like an addition off the back of the house. So it was a single story addition, old farmhouse, single story addition, or at least they renovated it in some way. All right. So it was ABC, it was the Charlie Delta corner of the house. They had an older chimney and then they converted it over with a wood burning stove, and something in there did not mesh over time. It rotted out, whatever. So to cover the chimney space up, because it was in the corner of the house, to cover it up, they literally, made kind of a triangular box or framing around it. Okay. So now you got this triangular tube going straight up to the roof. And once the embers got in there, it carried away, went right up into the roof line, and then ran up the roof. Now, this was a really, really shallow roof, but to match the rest of the house or the older section or what they did not renovate yet, they essentially made a rain roof to finish off the top. So they had a roof on top of a roof at 2 different pitches, and it was just all void space. And that newer roof that they had up there was actually, it was just a rubber membrane.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't no shingling or anything. So that kind of trapped a bunch of heat, ran up in that space. Nobody got up there in time. Well, I can't say that nobody tried to get up there in time because it was just that far gone. That rubber membrane kind of hid a lot of things. And it was the middle of the night. So by the time somebody, I think it was the neighbors that noticed it, called and said, hey, the neighbor's house is on fire. So by the time everybody started getting there, we went mutual aid, not right off the jump. But nonetheless, when everybody got there, this thing was ripping. But it was kind of interesting that was the only thing still standing, more or less, was, or held intact, was the roof. But everything below it was burned out. Had somebody gotten up there, maybe it could have stopped some spread. Not exactly the model you're talking about, where it's, okay, we're going to try and force this thing up, like possibly a stairwell. Everything kind of thinks that. And in the city that I live nearby, that would be I'm guessing that would be kind of the method. Like you're saying, okay, you cut the hole on the roof and it forces it right up the stairwell. And maybe perhaps that reason alone is why a lot of departments will say, or quite a few departments will say, no, we're not going to do it, because if it's first floor, second floor, I don't want to extend it or risk it going up a new space and then possibly traversing out to another floor altogether.
Yeah.
until we can actually get somebody that, can clarify that. I'm just guessing at this point.
Yeah, I could see that point. That's the thing. You have a first floor fire, a kitchen fire. Is there a need to vent the roof? No, not at all. I'm saying, you have that bedroom fire on the second floor of these capes, or it gets into the knee wall. These 2.5 stories, even a second floor bedroom fire on a 2.5. I really think that the roof needs to be popped, be taken, got open. It needs to get opened up. There's not enough space in these windows, a regular frame window, to relieve the pressure of that fire. It's just not enough. And I'll even go say even the holes that we cut on the roof is not enough sometimes. We really should be 4x4 hole, 36 square feet is sometimes not enough either. We got to rip even more, a bigger hole. The fires that I've been to where we've cut the roof open, the engine companies were able to push in farther than if we didn't cut the roof open.
Yeah. We always, one of the things that we teach with our guys at work and everything is, hey, why, a big reason why we're ventilating, yes, it is to force a flow path that we want. We're dictating the scenario. But a quick down and dirty way of putting that is, hey, the guys that are working inside, we're turning the AC on for them. It'll clear up a bit. It'll start getting a little bit cooler. Guys appreciate it. They immediately know, hey, that hole is open, whether it's a visual aspect or it's just a heat indication aspect. Let's go back a little bit. So when we vertically ventilate, let's say we got 2 arriving crews or 3, one's doing a search, one gets assigned to the roof and one gets assigned a hand line. At what time are you cutting that hole? Like, walk me through the process a little bit.
So it's the difference between vertical ventilation and horizontal ventilation, in my opinion, is everything's tactical. But where vertical ventilation is a little more lenient, it doesn't have to be as coordinated as horizontal ventilation. If you ventilate horizontally too early, it's going to ruin the fire's still going to go out. It's just not going to go out as easier. If you ventilate vertically a little too early, it's not going to ruin the operation as bad as horizontally. So we get on scene, engine company stretching in, and going to the roof is not an easy task. Ladders got to get thrown, or the sticks got to get put up. You got to bring the saws up, got to get the proper stuff there. You got to get to the proper location on the roof, and then you got to make your cuts. By the time all that gets done, the engine company's already probably pushing in. So it's not like one of these things where, let's hold up and hold up, don't go to the roof yet. Let's wait for the engine company to push in. By the time the engine's there and stretching the line and pushing in is going to happen a lot faster than guys getting up to the roof. I mean, even the quickest aerial ladders out on the market right now they're still slow. I mean, they're not rocket speeds, and you can do the whole shuffle with the ground ladders to wherever you're going. You still got to throw the ground ladder. You still got to wait for the guy to get to, bring all the tools up, mask up, or do whatever your SOGs are, and on our SOGs, we're wearing our SCBA while we're on the roof. By the time all that happens, the engine company's probably already making a push and flowing water in. Searches are probably already getting done. So I think it's on these houses that need to be vertically ventilated. That's why I said it's got to be high on the priority list, getting somebody up on that roof, because it takes a while. Even the best truck companies is going to take a while. I mean,
yeah.
From your experience out at your department where you live and where we work, I mean, you've seen it. I mean, we have 2 truck companies here, and we'll split crews, 2 in, 2 out, and it depends on who's working that day, who's who's on overtime, who's, detailed over the truck. We might have a guy that, the saw might weigh more than this dude. And, now he's got to bring up equipment that way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 100%. Both areas that I have the most experience in. At work, we're a little bit more, our tasks are combined. So even when we drill, we run our tasks simultaneously. So I think we kind of, and the same thing with our neighboring departments at work, is that, okay, when I got ventilation, you also have somebody moving a hand line, right? Even in a drill setting. All right. So say we got a suppression crew, a truck crew, a roof crew, I'm just keep picking on those same three things, but we never really separate those and run just a ventilation. We do have assigned inside of our own training calendar, hey, we're just going to go practice cutting holes, but it's not like that's the only time we practice cutting holes. We do put it all together quite regularly.
Yeah.
So it's more second nature to us. Whereas some of the other places I'm familiar with, our training regiment is we only got 2 hours, or maybe we only got 3 hours. So we focus on just truck work. And what do we mean by truck work? It's bringing that area. It's literally setting the truck up, bringing it up to the roof, cutting a hole, getting down. Okay, reset, and just keep doing it. You do that for 2 hours. That's it. Over and over again, year over year, and then, okay, say that's the first month of the year, the second month of the year. Well, not January, because 9 months of snow, 3 months of bad sledding. So move that up to like May.
Right.
May might be truck. June might be suppression or handline advancements. We never get a chance to actually piece that together regularly enough that it's second nature. So at least the guys that are setting up, getting ready to go to the roof, they get up to the roof, they're ready to go. Maybe they have to radio, hey chief, or ops, I'm ready to cut when you are. Or maybe they're connecting straight up with that handline crew, whoever's advancing in there. Hey, you guys in place? You got water on that fire, right? So now, and it's just kind of a clinical setting, if you will, for practical reasons that we say, hey, let's focus on more of a coordinated ventilation. I want the handline in place. I want that whole cut right then and there at the same time, just because we are so separated. So by saying that, or at least putting it as a checkbox on a command board, they kind of follow that. One's more organic. One's more, hey, I'm checking boxes. Hey, what's my next task? Oh, right, I got to fill this box, type of thing. And it's not to anybody's discredit. It's just how we get to our training and what becomes, as we train over and over again, what becomes second nature.
Yeah, I think that's what is it, like 80 something in the 80% is, volunteer fire service in America.
It's up there. I don't know the exact percentage, but it is quite a bit. And that's fine. That's cool.
Right. I volunteered. My old man volunteered. My grandfather volunteered. A lot of guys that work here volunteer. But you hit the nail on the head when you said, when you run volunteer drill nights, they got 2 hours. Maybe, unless you got some young bucks out there that have nothing going on, you got a little bit more. Or they come up, do, duty crews or what, however they operate, and they might do a little bit more training. But, you only have a snapshot of your department at that time. And you got to get that JPR done that night.
Right.
So, that's one hiccup where, it's just the nature of the beast with the training in the volunteer setting. Whereas on the job, on the career side, you have a captive audience for 24 hours, 10 hours, 14 hours, whatever you work. And you can, all right, we're going to run X, Y, and Z scenario. We're going to do like whatever we're going to do that day. But, I think one thing that the training needs to implement is we got to have a command officer there sit and just look, say, hey, instead of just checking boxes, like you said, we got to run through, all right, truck 1, you're going to the roof. Truck 2, you're going to do a search and actually see what the time progression is to see, oh, it took our second due truck company, 2 minutes to get to the roof, and it took them another, 3 minutes to get the hole cut. By that time, the hose line was already stretched and flowing water. Do we really need to tell them to hold off on cutting that hole? No, just go up, you're assigned a vertical event. We expect you to vertical event when, we don't need to tell you to cut the hole. We don't need to tell you to pop it open. I don't know if that's what you're getting to, but where, there's some departments that are more command driven, the chief will get on scene and tell you, I want you to take saw A. I want you to climb the peak, the seaside peak. I want you to do a 4x4 hole and don't pop it open to me.
That micromanaging type thing,
Yeah.
It comes back to the training aspect. How much do we train enough to where, you got a boss, one, trusting your boss, and two, your boss trusting their crew. It's one thing to go, hey, crew A, I just need you to cut a hole in the roof, right? And just trust that they're going to get it done, however they want to do it.
Right. The command officer.
You only have confidence in their abilities because of the training level. Whereas when we don't train enough, then that's where we get to either micromanage or maybe it doesn't get done. We don't check that box.
Well, I mean, in my mind, if I was running, I'm nowhere near going to be in that position. I don't want to be, but if I was,
you say that,
yeah, right. If I'm standing out front of a house and I'm running, and this is just in my mind, if I'm running a call, as soon as I assign a truck company to go vent the roof, that box is checked. And then it's, put the check, almost like you're golfing. You can put a check mark in the box and then circle it after they radio, hey, hole's cut, we're coming down the roof. Okay. I sent a company to the roof, the hole's getting vented. I'm waiting for the radio communication. Vertical ventilation's complete. We're heading off the roof. All right, I can circle that. That task is done. I can worry about, I shouldn't even have to worry about it, but it's check mark. It's check mark that I assigned somebody and I checked it off that it's been done, however many minutes later or seconds later.
Right. And we even drill that way though, too. So like, at work and in most agencies will actually do that. So they drill, not just checking the boxes, but also, hey, when we finally do the wrap up at the end of the night, hey, did that actually get done? Yeah, it got done. And this is what we did. All right, sweet. And the more we do that, it's just, it's a time distance shielding thing. The more we see our crews that I assign go to the roof and actually get that hole cut, the more confident I am in the whole process. Yeah. So I don't have to think about it. That's that second nature, going back to what we were saying earlier, timing wise. So are we purposely trying to time it, or is it just happen to be falling in sync with each other because we put the two pieces together? The ventilation, ventilation training, and then the suppression. Whereas, when we go out there, we're doing an evolution or something that we're tinkering with, but at the same time that we're running that evolution, we automatically we got a crew going to the roof, they're cutting the hole at the same time we're doing that suppression drill.
I think a lot of
separating it all the time.
I think a lot of that can be fixed with SOGs.
Okay.
In any department, even if you don't have an aerial, it's, if you want to write SOGs that talk, the sequence of arriving units and what their tasks are going to be, you could have, there's departments out here that don't have aerials. They don't need them. But first, if I was going to write their SOGs, first unit on scene, you're assigned to suppression. Second unit on scene, you're assigned to search. Third unit on scene, you're assigned to water supply. And fourth unit on scene, you're assigned to ventilation. Because in a department like that, where you have the home response and you have trucks coming, most important thing, we're on a truck company, I'm going to say it, the most important thing is putting water on the fire. Fire 100%. Goes out, everything is get better. And I always correlate this to, it's like a ballet. My daughters do dance. Yeah, I'm a dance dad, but everybody's got their part. An aggressive engine company that will stretch in fast and puts water on a fire will allow an aggressive truck company to go in and get deeper in a search. Conversely, an aggressive truck company that throws ladders and aggressively vents will allow the engine company to get in deeper. They complement each other. And if they don't have that complement, like if you have a timid engine company, you might think twice about going to the floor above and going a little deep on that search if your engine company is not up to standard. Same thing with the engine company. If you have that truck company that isn't proficient at throwing ladders, or they can't get to the roof and cut a hole, that engine company is going to take a beating. They might take a beating once. They might, we might go back and train on it the next day. Hey, truck, you got to get up and vent a little bit more. We took a beating on that last fire. It happens again. That next fire, that engine company might not go in as deep as it should have, and that fire might not go as well as it should go. It's a coordinated. Everything's coordinated. But I go back to, when you're talking ventilation, horizontal, 100% needs to be coordinated. Vertical ventilation, there's leeway, because you're not drawing the fire and hot gases on top of the guys on the engine company. Now, I will say, if you have, and this is where I think, I see pictures from where you are, where they send guys to the roof no matter what, just to cut a hole. You might have it, let's say we have a 2.5 story Cape Cod, or a 2.5 story Dutch Colonial, or even, you could say a 1.5 Cape Cod kitchen fire. You send a crew up to search Division 2, or, some people call it second floor. Here we call it Division 2. They go up to search the second floor bedrooms, and let's say the hose line's not in place yet, but you got an aggressive truck company going up to search the second floor. That's where that vertical ventilation's got to be held off. Because if that hose line isn't in place and you have crews above you, and now you pop that hole, now it's drawing all that heat and fire on those guys that are above the fire. And above the fire is the most dangerous place, especially searching without a hose line. But hands down, it's probably the most fun place to be. Stay dry.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
But that's the one time, that is when it needs to be coordinated. But I will say, do we need to be venting a roof on a kitchen fire that's, on the first floor? Do we need to be venting that roof? Probably not. Push in, take the windows where the fire is. Engine company puts the fire out. Crews go to the second floor, do their searches, vent as they go, and then the roof never gets cut. But if you have extension up into Division 2 or into those knee walls, the roof has to get cut. And I'll argue that with any fireman out there. And I think nationwide they're doing it.
So you guys just recently had one on your group that right down the block, around the corner from us.
Yeah.
How did that one go? Because you guys went straight up there and started cutting a hole as well, didn't you? Or at least had a split crew?
So our truck was out of service, so we were on an engine that day. And we were first in, so we had a pole line. So we were first in on the hand line, and I poked my head in the door. I got about maybe 15 feet in. I was just trying to get a layout for the Proby that was on the hand line. And the back room was already flashed. And what happened was that the rear sliders on the house broke out. It was a 3 patio home units, and this was in the center unit. So there was only slider windows on the back, and there was no windows in the front except for the front door. There was windows on the second floor, but there was a back bedroom on the first. Right? The front door was the only vent point on the front.
But on the second story, did it have windows off the front?
Yeah, there was a front bedroom that had windows. There was a back bedroom that had windows. There was a bedroom on the first floor that had one window, and then there was a sliders. So there wasn't many options for horizontal ventilation. This fire broke out the sliders for whatever reason. Fire cylinder investigation. No, I don't know what the cause was of the fire, but we had a heavy fire and smoke when we arrived, and the fire broke out the slider, got into the eaves of the roof line, and traveled it was a giant void space above the first floor. Giant. A lot of wasted space in this house. I mean, they could probably put another bedroom up there if they wanted to, but cheap building. Fire was cooking so hot up there that even as we're flowing hand lines, I think some of the drywall on the ceiling degraded and busted down, and so it was just an oven up there. And while we were in there, I was begging for the roof to get popped, and luckily the truck company, the single truck company that we had that day, the guys were on the ball, and as soon as that roof was opened up, we were able to push in a lot farther.
So you could feel
And
it. It helps reinforce it too, from the other
yeah,
aspect. Like we were saying, you turn it on for the AC and the guys, or turn the AC on for the guys inside. Sometimes it's been a while since we've been in there, and get to feel what that's like, how
right.
important it reinforces the importance of that.
I mean, the Proby on the line did a fantastic job, but we were pretty much on our bellies fighting this fire. And as soon as that roof, it was like the weight of the world was lifted off of us as soon as that roof got opened up. We were able to almost stand up and get the hose line over the couch and this counter bar height table that they had, and knock the bulk of the fire down. If it wasn't for that roof opened up, I don't know. There's some great pictures online and on it you can see, but that fire right there was like, when we got out, I was like, that fire is why we vent vertically. There is nowhere to vent horizontally in that fire. The fire was already vented horizontally out the slider. The BC told me when he went around and did his 360, because he got there pretty quickly while we were stretching our hand line, he was pulling up and he did his 360, and he said he couldn't even make it between the house and the woods that were behind it because the fire was so intense back there. He couldn't do his 360. So the fire was vented already, but we couldn't push in without that vertical vent. It was the only thing that allowed us to push in farther.
Was there a wind factor at play there that day?
No. I can tell you there wasn't a wind factor because it was cold that day, and when I got out of the fire and I was taking my turnouts off, if it was windy, it wasn't cold. I think it was like 19 degrees that day, and it wasn't like I was uncomfortably cold coming out of that fire. If it was windy, I would have felt it because we took a beating in there. But they did a great job. They did a great job on that. Everybody did a great job.
I was at the gym while that was happening, and as soon as I got the alert, I'm like, oh, all right, I'll tune in, and so now I got my things. I got to the point where I'm like, I'm sitting on the edge of the bench, just trying to listen. Hey, Sean, would you keep it down? I'm trying to listen to this. Like you're trying to listen to a radio broadcast or something. I mean, it is a radio broadcast, but you're listening live, and it was interesting hearing the first, I'd say 10 minutes of that. I listened to the whole thing, but what was really cool was hearing the change. Your tone, the other crews that were working on the roof, the tones change as conditions change, as it got better. But there was one in there that something you got on the radio, I believe, and said something along the lines of like, "Hey, it's getting really hot in here." Like in other words, guys, can you cut that hole?
Yeah, I mean, they were up on the roof already, and they were doing their. I mean, I knew they were up there, but it's like one of those. Everybody talks on the radio. It's one of those things where everybody thinks they need to talk. I felt like that was one of those times where I don't like to talk a lot on the radio, but that was one of those times where my Proby's pushing in, we're pushing in, and it's like we need to vent this roof, or we're gonna have to back out at this point. It was one of those, either open this roof up or we're coming out.
Yeah. Plus, there was a close water supply. Timing issue there too. We're running pretty low.
Yeah, the guys on the second due engine, they had a tough hydrant to get to. They had to cross like a huge gully. It was the hydrant set pretty far off the road. I don't even think the front suction on the engine had to reach. I think they had to splice a line in there. So it wasn't a normal water supply that we train on. Usually we bumper up to a hydrant, connect a steamer in because it's right there. And it was one of those things that, shame on us as officers for not thinking of that scenario. But it was one of those curveballs that, we had some newer guys on the engine, and they got it done. They got it done. We never lost water.
No, you didn't. But you hearing your operator that day saying, hey, he was given the markings. Hey, you're a half tank. hey, you're almost out. You know, you're a quarter left. Hey,
Yeah.
he's letting you know on, you know, being the guys inside, but he was also letting that second due water supply. Hey, you going to send that water or what? What's going on
Yeah.
over there? And
Yeah.
but they were working. You know, they were working out their issues that they were, you know, trying to defeat there, and like it got there in the nick of time.
Yeah.
You know,
It was in the
so you had
Proby
two
shot
things kind of playing, being on the hand line. You're like, you know, you're hearing, hey, you're about to get out of water. At the same time, it's like, well, that's the only thing keeping me from, you know, collapsing here.
Yeah.
You know, and at the same time, can I just get somebody turn the ceiling fan on in here?
Our pump operator actually did say, I am out of water. And at that point, my Proby shut the hand line down, and I grabbed him. I got right in his face. I said, don't shut this hand line down. Keep it open until there's no water coming out of here.
Yeah, shake it.
Yeah,
that last drop out. I don't care.
I go, until there's no water coming out of here, you keep this hand line open. And if we don't get water, we're going to have to back out. You know, that was what I told him. I said, you keep this open until there's no water. And it was like one of those, like you see, like, it was almost like Popeye eating the spinach. You know, the line started going down, and then all of a sudden it just boom, pop right back up, and we were back in the fight, and we never had it back out. And, you know, he put a lot of fire out. He did it. I think that was his second fire, and he did a fantastic job on that line.
Yeah, that particular individual is pretty lucky. He just got in, and freaking how many's he got now under his belt?
Yeah,
you know, he's got. Is he still on probation? I think.
Yeah,
you know, so
all these new guys, they got
just less than a year, and he's got a handful under his belt. Meanwhile, we got a couple guys that are at 6 years that just have bad luck and timing. The day that they take vacation, the one day a year, you know, they lose out on, you know, 3 jobs overnight.
It happened to my senior guy on the rig.
Poor guy
takes off for vacation, and we had two struck jobs that day, and one ended up being it was a good truck fire, and that was that one the chimney fire that it wasn't a chimney fire. It was, you know, it's almost the same exact scenario you guys went to mutual aid. We had it, you know, right in our own town. It was the chimney used to be on the outside of the house, and they took their, you know, they put an addition. It definitely was an addition, because when we started opening up that wall, there was the windows were still there, old framed windows with the weights in them.
Yeah,
they just framed over it and put, you know, shiplap on top of it, and it was like a, you know, they were using whatever scrap wood they had to frame this in, and these poor people, they had, you know, they just had their chimney inspected, they just had their chimney sweeped, and
good to go.
Yeah, you're good to go, right?
You're good to go.
I'm guessing
got the paperwork.
Yeah, the receipt was still on the countertop.
I'll get out of here.
Yeah, and I'm guessing when they did the sweep, they must have knocked some mortar out where the firebox was, or just above the firebox, right where the flue closure is, and you could shine a flashlight from one side of the fireplace to the other, you know, from one room, and come out the back side of it. It was wide open. There was like no mortar there.
Well, it's because they only inspect the front. And then, and then look at the sides.
The
Why would I look at the sides? You don't have a fire there. All right. So with that, going back, that one that you had, the Proby with the Popeye line there, did you end up taking a look to see what those guys did for that ventilated space?
So, kind of, sort of, because
or
after
did they explain it to you, hey, we only did, because you mentioned earlier, hey, a lot of times we may not even be cutting a big enough hole.
They cut a pretty good hole, and then because of the fire, the amount of fire that was in that void space up there, it made the hole substantially bigger. So it did its job. It channeled everything right up out of the hole. I don't know how big they cut it, but they got up there. I mean, from what the guys on the roof told me they cut, it seemed like they cut a substantial hole. And then as soon as they popped that ceiling, it was fire blowing out of that hole.
How far down did they have to break through, or did they not have to?
They didn't have to,
because it just fell out.
Yeah, it was just the shingles and the sheathing that they had to cut open. So there's nothing that they had to pop, because the fire already degraded the drywall ceiling.
Right, that's right. So right. Yeah.
I mean, that room where the main body of fire was, there was no ceiling left in there, and we didn't pull any of it. It was just gone. Like that, I mean, that fire was intense. For drywall is supposed to be a fire stop, and there was no drywall left.
Yeah, no tape. It's because they didn't tape the seams.
Yeah.
That's probably why.
I mean, we're talking about vertical ventilation, and I know there's a lot of different ways guys cut roofs. We seem to, geared towards one way of cutting. There's the national curriculum way of cutting. I'm not going to mention, everybody knows what the national curriculums are. There's, the three big ones out there. When we mention how we cut roofs in our area, people kind of, they kind of cringe, but to me, with the way we do it, when you go up to the peak and straddle that peak, now, notwithstanding lightweight construction where there's not a ridge beam, the strongest part of the roofs are the hips and the ridges, because that's where the most lumber is. You have, depending on what type of rafters they put up there, 2x6, 2x8. They're not using 2x4s in beam and rafter construction, but you have these 2x6, 2x8s with a ridge beam going right down the middle. That's the safest part of the roof, is being up on that ridge. I mean, how do they
think maybe it's just because a lot of people don't get an opportunity to practice it?
I've talked to some, I was at a conference a couple years ago and was talking to a guy from the Midwest, and they do the same type of peak cut that we do, but because of their masonry background, with a lot of guys that work on the truck companies, where we pull the saw towards us, they're pushing the saw. And I've tried it, and it's not easy. It's not easy at all.
That's interesting.
Because when you cut masonry, you push the saw. You don't pull the saw. And I was talking to a guy who works on a very busy a squad, and he's like, yeah, we go up to the peak, we straddle the peak, but we start high and push the saw low. And I was like, you do? He goes, yeah, you got to understand, our truck company tactics, the guys that used to work on the truck companies, or, the squad companies that go up and cut the roofs, they're all masons. And that's how they knew how to run a saw. And that's the technique that got passed down from whenever this department, wrote their truck manuals. And it's just funny because, around here, we pull the saw. And, when I say pull a saw, we're talking rotary saws, K950s, K970s, or whatever type of rotary saw you're using. And I mean, there is a time and a place for a chainsaw on a roof. It's not for a peak cut. I mean,
I would say no. It's kind of impossible. You kind of want to have that saw dipped as vertical as you can for a chain. It doesn't have to be vertical, but you want it up in the air, so they ask of it,
right?
Kind of pointing up in the sky, so that way we can feel those rafters a little bit easier if you're rolling over them. It's just kind of hard to reach out and dip that saw.
Yeah, and and everybody, you talk to people about bringing the rotary saw to roof or vertical ventilation, and we're still talking peak roofs here. We're not talking flat roofs, because I think when you go to a flat roof, it's one, departmental driven. You see West Coast firemen, they're bringing chainsaws to the roof. East Coast firemen, they're bringing rotary saws to the roof. But when you go up on that a peak roof, it's tactically driven. What kind of not tactic, what type of cut you're doing. Are you going to the peak? Are you straddling the peak? Are you reaching over and pulling that saw back? That's when you have to use a rotary saw. If you're going up on a roof ladder, can you get away with a rotary saw? It depends on how well you train with it. I think the chainsaw is probably a little safer and you get a little bit more reach. But everybody, the big thing you hear is you can't feel the rafters using a rotary saw, and you're not training enough with a rotary saw. You can feel the rafters with a rotary saw just as good, if not better, I think, than some of the chainsaws. especially these chainsaws that have these, these fire rescue chains on them with aggressive carbide tips. They're going to tear through a rafter. Like, you don't even know it's there. There's ways of operating that chainsaw vertically down into the hole, so you have more surface area coming up against the rafters. But anybody that's operated a chainsaw in their past life, cutting firewood or whatever, nobody does it that way. And you always revert back to what you've done your whole life. And unless you train that way, plunge that saw straight down with a chainsaw and bring it to the rafter, you're not going to feel it. You're not going to feel the rafters. Where I think that rotary saw, depending on what blade you have in that rotary saw, you're going to feel the rafters, like I said, a lot easier, more often than not with a rotary saw.
Yeah, you definitely can feel it. I think for newer people coming into it, one, nowadays, the new people just don't have the basic skill set that we assume they have of using chainsaws, hell, even lawnmowers. So we're kind of got to teach that. But when they rip that thing, they're like, wow, that's fat, and they buzz right through it. Yeah. Oh, there goes the rafter.
Yeah.
Like, oh, all right. The scope of today is we're teaching how to cut the hole, not what to feel, just, that fine tune, that comes later with experience. We'll do after you do it 1,000 times. You learn something they always say you learn something to mastery level after doing it 1,000 times. Well, I guess, you can make a case that if I do it 1,000 times wrong, maybe I didn't learn it. I definitely learned what not to do.
Yeah. But it's, that old adage is your first day, it's 20 years on the job, but it's your first day over, or however that saying goes. But one thing I will know, you bring up, at the academy and training and stuff like that, especially with newer guys that, guys that are rotating through the truck companies doing their probationary time, or, you see it in drill night. The one thing I will say with a rotary saw is that guys don't bury the blade all the way down. They just get enough to where the teeth are biting in, and then they almost like skin the sheathing. And it's like, no, bury that blade all the way to the guard. You'll know when it hits a rafter. It'll bog down a little bit, and then you just pop the saw back up, ride the rafter over, and then bury the blade again. Especially on these peak cuts. I always, when we do these peak cuts and we straight, if anybody doesn't know what a peak cut is, you get to the peak of the roof, either by the aerial ladder, or you throw a ground ladder, throw a roof ladder over, and then you move, you walk the peak, or you shimmy across the peak, however you're comfortable, to where you have to make the cut. Once you get to the area where you need to make a cut, you say you take a sprinter stretch stance. One leg, the side that you're cutting on, you're going to have a straight leg if you're flexible enough. And then you're going to take the saw and reach across. If you're cutting on the left-hand side of the roof, the left-hand side of the peak, you're going to reach across with your right hand. And then you're going to draw the saw back up. And then you scooch back a little bit and do this over and over again. And I try to tell guys when, we're training on the truck, is when we're doing this tactic, is think of the roof as a sheet of paper at this point. Everybody thinks when we make these cuts, especially cutting on a roof prop, and it's a 4x4 hole, they're like, oh, I know I got this 4x4 square, so I only need to make a cut on the edge, a cut in the middle, and then a cut on the other edge, because then it's going to louver for me. It's like, well, that's not going to happen on a roof. One, we don't know. We're not going to have a 4x4 cutout for us on an actual roof.
Yeah, like a target.
I tell these guys, what's that?
Yeah, it's like a target. We don't have a target up there.
Right. So I tell these guys, I was like, take the saw, and I want you to make at least 5, maybe 6 vertical cuts. And if you can get more, get more. So we're going to cut this roof. We're going to shred the roof like a piece of paper, like it's going through a shredder. And then we're going to we can either cut straight across the peak, or we can take a couple angle cuts. And all that's doing is shredding the roof a little bit more. So now when we take our punching tool, either an axe, I like bringing the pick-headed axe up to the roof. I'm not a fan of bringing a flat-headed axe up to the roof. Then we just punch that roofing material that we just shredded to bits with our saw it's not going to look like a Rembrandt painting here. It's not going to be, it's not going to be, like my grandfather was a general contractor and everything's 90-degree squares or 45-degree angles, miters. It's, it's going to look like you cut the roof open. There's going to be shards of roof sheeting. All we're trying to do is efficiently cut this roof open as quickly as possible. So that's one of the drawbacks of being on roof props. Or what are we going to do? We don't get vacant structures to train on regularly. Even the city, that we border used to get vacants all the time, and they don't get vacants anymore. That's why this area just, built like, I don't know, that's got, how much do you think they spent on that roof prop?
At the city, at the academy?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I was just funny. You were saying we were talking about this. You were talking about the saw and the position. Push it down and all that. Well, we were up there today and we were doing exactly that. But I went to replacing panels. Of course, you always get one in every class. Drops an axe down through, goes into that space. So I went down there to get in there, and I didn't even realize there's tie-off points. There's a couple hooks mounted up in there, ready to go. They're brand new. They haven't. I bet nobody even knows they're up there. So the other instructor I was working with, I'm like, "Hey, did you know there's hooks in there?" He's like, "No." He works up there all the time. He had no idea they were strapped up. That they're brand new. They're still shiny. But I did know, that the galvanized steel beam that's in there, or rather, it's like extruded rectangular tube or square tube. It has a whole bunch of tie-off points. So if you open those, if you pulled out those panels, you could tie off and do all sorts of stuff from.
Yeah.
I have no idea how much that cost. And the floor on the platform that's up there even has, there's a thing to do with trench cuts. There's a thing to do larger, so you can keep expanding. So 4x4 to 4x8 to 16, or an 8x8.
I think there's 4x4 panels that can get dropped into the flat roof area.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that prop probably could withstand the F4 hurricane that just ran through Oklahoma last night. I mean, the thing is,
it's pretty solid.
Yeah. But back to, the take, with these props, that's why they built that prop. We're not getting the vacants that we used to. And it's probably because the housing market these days is astronomical. So even the most dilapidated houses now are getting bought and getting flipped or remodeled because, they're just the way the economy is right now. So, we have to use these roof props, and these probationary firemen and even firemen that are on the job now are getting used to just training on a 4x4 hole. And like you hit the nail on the head too. It's like you're putting a target there for these people, for these guys to train on. And we don't have a target when we go up to the roof. The last roof I cut, the target was when I started scooching across that peak, my legs started getting hot. So I knew we were over the fire. Yeah. I turned to the guy that was on the saw. It says, right here. He goes, how do you know? I go, because it's hot.
Because I'd like to get off.
Yeah.
I want to get out of here.
I go, I can feel it. But
I was up there on that prop all day today with that other instructor, and he started the day off just to get it spinning. And all right, let's see what his take on it. I haven't worked with him in a while. We kind of grew up together, so it's really cool to work with him. He taught that same method. So you start up high. So this is going back to the peak cuts. You start up high, you dip, you bury that blade all the way down, pretty much damn near the arbor nut, and then you push down, and then you pull back, release the trigger, pick it up, and then, bury the blade so it stops. His point in doing that, somebody from his crew at his department showed him that, and he liked it. He loved it. Just runs with it all the time now. One thing he found with that over what we typically do. So all I've ever learned was you reach all the way out, spin up the blade, high RPM, all full out, then try to bury that blade. And I've always struggled with it, a little bit shorter, I think, or at least it feels like I'm just not as flexible. So trying to bury that blade down in there kind of sucks. And then pulling up at you. I can get it done, no problem. It doesn't have to, like you said, a Rembrandt. That's exactly it. But I can get it done. Watching these people do it for the first time this way, the way that he showed us, everybody nailed it. Not one person had a problem with that blade popping out or not being able to sink that blade. And I don't know exactly what it is. It's just the body mechanics, but by plunging it first, guiding it down, even with one hand, your hand that sticks out further onto the guard, okay, maybe you can't get out as far. So then you just place it on top of the air box and continue to push. They were able to get these nice, clean cuts. Then, you do your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and then zip it across the top or on your angle. That's it.
I'm interested though, because you go back to these props again. We're trained on OSB.
Yes.
So what's that saw going to do when you start hitting shingles? I've tried it. It was a prop but built with shingles.
When you push, you mean?
Pushing it over shingles. And the saw, now, I'm not a mason. I got a Italian last name. The saw, when I was pushing it, would jump. And I think that's common for people that don't do it that way often. I don't know if the technique is different, or you got to go slower, or what you have to do. I've always just pulled the saw. It's the way I was taught to do by our senior guy that just retired a couple months ago. And pulling saws always worked for me. I don't care which way you do it, as long as you're proficient at it. But back to the OSB, that's another reason why I don't bring a flat-head axe up to the roof. And if we want to talk about vertical ventilation and flat-headed axes, or versus the pick-headed axe, I can go in a whole diatribe about that if we want to. I know a lot of people out there, a lot of instructors out there talk about, you got to bring the flat-head axe up to a roof, because when you cut with an axe, the blade of the axe gets stuck in the roof. And I think that is a training scar from using OSB.
That and how you're swinging the axe.
And how you're swinging the axe.
You're not chopping it like wood.
Right.
It depends on which, peak cut versus your below the hole, if you will.
Right. And, and
how you're swinging it. You're right up on top of your target versus out and away like you're chopping wood.
Right. And, you're not doing a peak cut with an axe. The only thing you're using an axe for is to break the roofing material up after you've cut the hole. If your saw dies and you're up on a peak cut, it's a struggle to cut that hole from the peak. Now, if you're up on a roof ladder cutting with an axe, that can be done. The saw might not always start, but the axe will run out of gas. I don't know if you've heard that saying.
I have not, but it completely makes sense.
But there is a definite technique to swinging an axe. And this is one of the times where I'll say that the newer firemen that are coming in, I've always asked them, do you chop wood at home? You chop wood for your fireplace? Did you ever chop wood for your old man's fireplace? And when they say yes, now I got to break them of a habit of how I was swinging an axe. Or someone comes in, they said they've never swung an axe before. Perfect. Now I can teach you how to cut with an axe, because we're not chopping roofs, we're cutting roofs. And there's a whole different technique on how to swing an axe to cut a roof, because we're not chopping it. When you chop it, that's when the blade gets wedged. The blade is an inclined plane. It's gonna wedge in that roof if you chop, and then you're gonna struggle to take the axe out of the roofing material. But if you swing it correctly in the toe of the axe, when I'm talking about the toe, it's the top portion, the top corner of the blade is going to puncture the roofing material, and then the blade is going to come in perpendicular and it will cut the roofing material. We don't want to chop the roofing material. That's how it gets stuck.
There's a brand out there that's producing axes that specifically designed, it's their take on it. They have a really nice toe to it, and then it's kind of beefier near the bottom of the blade, so it kind of guides your cuts. Even if you miscue, kind of realigns you during your, as it's just getting into the material. It's nifty. It is kind of cool.
I've had a pipe dream about buying one of those for myself, but you know how we have our
Misses? You know, the
No,
missus
no,
finds
it
out.
would,
You
it would
know,
be one of those
oh God,
purchases where
what's this charge? Yeah,
yeah, I'd probably get that shipped to the firehouse, but it's it's one of those things where the whole using your personal equipment on the job type of thing
yeah,
would be it's the last thing. It is what it is.
yeah. We'll leave it. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah. But there's you go to you hit on vertical ventilation. With the capes. I grew up in a cape too. My bedroom was on the second floor of a cape, and I remember there was that 3-foot knee wall or 4-foot knee wall, however high it was, and then my ceiling was a 45-degree angle, and then there was maybe 3 or 4 feet of flat ceiling at the top, and then it looked like a pentagon.
Yep.
And everybody can picture what that looks like if you grew up in a Cape Cod and your bedroom was on the second floor. And those are the ones where I don't think the peak cut would work as well, because we're trying to capture ventilation at three different areas, like we talked about. That void space at the top triangle, the livable space, and then the knee wall space. And that's where that cut, if you bring up your roof ladder and rip a cut from the peak of the roof all the way down to the gutters, and then just reach across and just slice that roof open, and you're almost doing like a half of, a trench cut only on one gable end, only on one side of the roof. Then you capture the vent of all 3 of those spaces.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's clear.
I see. I'm imagining it because same thing. I grew up in that. I know exactly what you're talking. And that 3-foot knee wall was buried. There was just so much shit piled in there too. It was the Christmas ornaments. It was the save boxes from every little thing you did in school, from kindergarten all the way on up. Just jammed into that space.
Well, yeah, because Cape Cods don't have attics.
No, that was essentially the attic. When mom or dad said, "Hey, go put it in the attic," you were stuffing it essentially in your closet. You didn't have a closet.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like my old man's house had an actual door, because there was a dormer on one end, so we could have there was there was a bifold door, but there was a door where you could actually walk into it. But that was added on later on. The access to that attic space was this little scuttle hole that 3 feet high by 2 feet wide, and that's most access to these knee walls. And
that's what we have at our house now. Yeah,
right. And those engine companies they had to get up there. That's what they got to look for to get if the fire's in the knee walls, they either got to open up with hand tools or they got to find that scuttle. And if they open that up before the vent's taking place, they're gonna take a beating. That's where the vent's got to come before. The hose line's got to be in place, but that vent has to happen before they open up that knee wall. Because if they open up that knee wall without the vent taking place, that's just an oven. It's just an oven, and all those hot gases and that knee wall's under pressure. And when the pressure's got to get released, and when they open it up, where's it going to go? On the guys on the hose line.
Right.
So that's when that vent's got to happen, before those guys open up that knee wall. I think that's probably one of them. I wouldn't say the only time, but it's up there for when the ventilation's got to take place before the hose line advances to where they got to get to.
Or at least it's got to get started immediately, so that by the time that the perforation hits, it ends up being just right before nearby, and that I think that just happens naturally. It's not that we design it that way. I think it's timing, like you said. It takes a ton of work, a ton of effort. We're not delaying it on purpose, because now we'll be even further behind.
Right.
But again, it's how we piece it all together.
Well, and we know it from our area, balloon frame construction. You get a fire in the basement, it's going in the attic, and you have to vent the roof on that one. There's no point of venting horizontally on that. To me, what's safer? Yeah, and I had this discussion with a retired chief from a smaller city department where he wouldn't send guys up to the roof. They would ladder the gable end and cut where the old gable vents used to be. To me, what's safer, working a rotary saw above your head or on the side off of a ladder, or being up on a roof and working the saw below you, or working the saw off a roof ladder. I've seen guys handle saws off the side of an extension ladder, and it's scary watching some of these guys cut. It's not something we do often. Work a chainsaw or a rotary saw off to the side of an extension ladder. That's not ergonomically correct. It's that's another thing with the truck companies. I always tell my guys, if you're left-handed, learn how to do things right-handed. If you're right-handed, learn how to do left-handed, because you might not be in a situation where you can always do something right-handed. But you go up a 24-foot extension ladder or 28-foot extension ladder, depending on the size of the house. You're so far, 24, 28 feet, depending on how far you're up there, and now you're working a rotary saw or a chainsaw off the side of your body. That's looking for an injury either to you or somebody else. I'd rather be up on top of
the ladder, plus the the gyro from the saw.
Yeah. I'd rather be up on the roof, or have my footing on a roof ladder, cutting the roof open, then opening up the gable end where the vent used to be. And nowadays, even with older houses that had gable vents, and then they put new roofs up on there, and they have ridge vents or they have box vents through the roof, and they have the soffit vents. A lot of those gable vents are closed off with, if it's cheaply done, they just put a piece of plastic over it. If it's done correctly, they'll probably put a piece of 1/2-inch plywood or OSB. So now you're cutting through siding, and you're cutting through the OSB to get through that exterior wall.
Right.
Who knows what's on this exterior wall? You could have two layers of siding. You could have aluminum siding. Our saws will cut aluminum siding, but I'd rather cut asphalt shingles all day than rip through aluminum siding. Who knows what's up there? Once you might have, like you said, how much crap was stacked up in your attic.
It was that thing was packed, completely packed. There was no space by the time we moved out. No, not none.
It's usually pushed up against the walls, so you can actually get to it, so you can get in there a little bit. And I mean, I'm not a fan of cutting. I can see where you could do it. I'm just not a fan of it, just based on, one, the safety of it, ergonomics of it. I've seen it done. I've seen pictures out from out your way, you guys doing it. But to me, maybe I'm just more comfortable on a roof. I like to have my guys more comfortable on a roof. I think it's just safer to be up on a roof, and we go into lightweight construction, how safe it is to be up on lightweight construction roofs, and whether you cut them or not, and what fails on a lightweight construction. The one thing is, they say when the truss fails, the whole roof fails. Out of the fires I've seen where the whole truss roof failed were the apartments to the west of us when we went mutual aid.
Mm-hmm.
Those apartments that burn like every other year, some big conflagration happens. That's when I've seen the whole roof failed. But usually when it's one truss fails, when they say the whole truss fails, it's just that triangle that fails. I mean, is the sheathing part of the truss system? Yes. But that's, risk assessment that you have to take. And, hopefully the company officer is on top of the ball. The fire that you talked about that we had a couple months ago where they cut that hole in the roof, that was a truss roof. They cut it. They were safe. They got up there. They got down. Fire went through. And I don't know, the guys that were up on the roof, they never really thought they were in any danger. We had one experienced fireman up there. He knew what he was doing. So the truss roofs that are a whole different animal. You have to know what you're looking at when you're cutting these roofs. I'm not saying go and cut all the trusses, rip right through them, because they're only 2x4s.
No, not by any means.
You got to be, you got to be careful what you're doing up there. It's not like we had a fire years ago in an old apartment building way at Mutual Aid, and when we cut this roof, the rafters were 2x12s. So even our rotary saw, we could run the rotary saw right through the rafters, and there was still 8 inches of lumber still there, because the rotary saw, 12-inch rotary is only going to make a 4-inch cut. And we cut probably I think my fireman cut like a 6x4 hole in this roof, and the thing was built like turn of the century. Like, I think it was like hand hewn. It looked like it was hand hewn 2x12s up there. But I'm a big fan of vertical ventilation on peak roofs. Flat roofs, we don't get a lot of them around here, so that's not our bread and butter. Cape Cods, 2.5 Dutch Colonials, that's the far as we're going to around here, and that's our experience, is cutting those roofs open.
The current students were asking a lot about flat roofs, and the situation we were talking about, kind of the conversation we were having was revolving around residential. So residential. And the only thing we practice, and it goes back to the training props, right? The training props are that same, what is it? It's not even 3/8 ply, or actually it's OSB. So it's not even ply. And we're up there doing flat roof cuts, but you're staring at wood. So they started getting it. You can tell by their questions, they're thinking, hey, when I get onto a residential house, I'm on a house with a flat roof. Can I cut this way? It's like, well, okay, wait a minute. So somehow we skipped over something here, because when do you see a flat roof on a house? You really don't. Yeah. I can't think of one offhand. I couldn't think of one in the moment. I'm sure there's some crazy design out there that somebody's got somewhere, but ultimately you don't. You have walkable pitches.
Right. And that's the thing. I was going to say, the closest you're going to get to a flat roof around here on a residential is like a dormer that has a very, very, it's still not flat. It might be built like a flat roof, but
slight pitch to it. Yeah.
Because we need the pitch for the runoff, snow to run off, the rain to run off. We're not going to H-style apartment buildings with flat roofs and scuttle drains. It's residential houses.
Now that I say that out loud, I can think of, there is an apartment. It's out by me. So out by where I live, there's a apartment style. It's a garden apartment that has like a flat style roof, because it's got mansard sides. So it's got a small parapet wall, but I haven't gone in there enough to know what the actual truss construction is, if it's like a lightweight steel or if it's some engineered beams going across or whatever. But it is flat up there, and there's a slight parapet, and then covered by mansard roofing. It's a very ugly looking building, but that's the only thing I can think of. But again, that's an apartment complex. It's not like somebody's house.
Right. And just where we work, I could probably, I'm estimating, but I could probably count on both hands the amount of flat roof construction that is with dimensional lumber. I think every other flat roof around here is steel I-beams with corrugated steel or some sort of sheathing material that's up on there. You can picture the taxpayer that's up on the north side of town across from the grocery store.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what was coming to my mind. And I know they just recently redid a lot of those apartments on the upstairs with it was a rain roof before they repaired it or renovated, or rather. I don't know if is it still a rain roof up there, or is it they just decided to make it one?
Yeah. Right.
One roof
And
with a
then
shitty
there's
space.
and then that same area on the west side of the grocery store where the nail salon is,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that small little taxpayer there, that's another, you know, ordinary construction flat roof. You know,
All
they
right.
did
Yeah,
a
so they are
census.
out there.
They did a census study here a couple years back, and a couple years, and there's been some newer developments gone up. I mean, we're pretty much developed as much as we can develop in where we work. But they did a census study where it was like in the 70 percentile was post World War II construction that wasn't lightweight construction. So all 70% of the residential houses when they did the study was dimensional lumber, beam and rafter construction. Now, there's been some newer housing tracts gone up, you know, and then there's always the, you know, somebody puts an addition on their house and they're putting trusses up. And that's when you got to know and you got to get out there and figure that stuff out. I mean, our first due area where we work, there's a massive housing tract and it's all truss construction. You know, some of the apartment complexes.
Massive. And I'm surprised we haven't gone there. I mean, we go there all the time for medical calls, but we haven't really gone for anything, you know, large fires or anything like that.
Right. They had a small
cooking
little
fires, of course, but
right. They had a small little cabinet cooker the other night, and that was about it. But
yeah.
man, when that something goes there, it's gonna be going.
It is. And not that I'm preying on, you know, the people that live there. By no means that's what I mean. It's just that I am really surprised with the amount of people living in there.
Yeah.
And the state of that place, lightweight construction, it's prime for a middle of the night fire.
Right, and supposedly they're putting almost the exact same thing up across the street,
right across the street,
bigger, and it's gonna be bigger, like more units, you know. And they got the 3-story that's up the road a little bit. You can see it from the road. We go there all the time for medical. I mean, yeah, it's sprinklered, but the attic's not sprinklered.
No,
you know, the church apartments that are in our first due. One building has sprinkler attics, one building doesn't. And I remember seeing pictures of that when it was being built. It looked like it was built with toothpicks.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What year roughly did that get put in?
Early 2000s. I remember when I first got hired here, the senior man was telling me about it. He showed me pictures of it, and I got hired in 07. So
yeah, I didn't realize I had that wood.
Yeah, you wouldn't know it was a wood construction from the outside. I mean, obviously the roof is wood, but then, you know, you go to our place, and here is one of these fires. You know, there's buildings that everybody has them in their districts where you pray that they never catch on fire because someone's either going to die in them. It could be a civilian, it could be an LODD, and everybody's got them in their district, and you just pray these things never catch on fire. And I would say one is where our work physicals are.
Yeah. Yep.
It's cut up. It's been remodeled countless times. And then the last remodel they did is they just took trusses. The roof that was on there was a walkable pitched roof. And then they just took trusses and they just put trusses on top of the roof that was already there. So
Stacked
now they have
patched them.
Yeah. So now now you have the office space where the doctor's office is. Then there was an attic space that they use for storage between the ceiling and the original roof. And now there's another space between the original roof and the roof that's there now.
Right. And massive void space.
Yeah. And it was so it's dimensional, ordinary construction, the original structure, and then there's lightweight construction on top of it.
Yeah, which means it's gonna, if something rips, it's gonna get up in there, rip straight down that new void space.
And
Even though there's
they
supposed to be fire stops every so often and all that stuff, but
well
you know
that
it's
and the last time I was up in there, we had a call chasing smoke or something like that. This was years ago. It was right after they did the new roof. There are holes in the original roof that connects both void spaces.
oh man. You think
Yeah.
is it for a maintenance purpose then?
I forget what they were there for. I mean, this is years ago that, I haven't been back when I was on the engine, the fireman that we were, going there chasing some alarm or smoke or something like that. But yeah, I remember getting up in there and it was just, you crawl around or you had to crawl around between the ceiling and the original roof. And then you would go through and then all of a sudden there's a scuttle hole that pokes through to the new roof. And it's just, a lumber yard up there. So you get a fire that gets in the one void space, it's going to get into the next void space. And what do? You have to vertically vent that. And, that thing's going to run. And there's the new apartments that they just built, the east side of town. It's almost to the border.
Yep.
Have you been up in those?
I have actually. Yeah, when they were building them, we snuck over there. Some contractors actually, we're talking the early stages. Some contractors that we kind of, hey, tried not to scare them because they had the headphones on. They're cutting.
Yeah.
They got some machine, and they said, yeah, hey, help yourself. And then they ended up leaving the doors unlocked once they started getting going, and actually putting up windows, doors, started filling in the framework that they had. And they just let us just come and go as we pleased. I'm sure you guys, your group did it as well.
Yeah, we went up. I can't remember. Are those flat roofs or are those peaked? I can't picture in my head.
Geez, now I don't know because I'm still stuck. I can't get past. They have like that catwalk that runs down the middle. So it's all wood. It's a wooden catwalk that's up inside the attic space. It just runs the whole thing, which kind of defeats the purpose of the fire stops.
Right, and the fire stops apparently, and I didn't know. I called our resident fire marshal who just who had fire marshaling training, and I asked him. I said, "Their fire stops is OSB." He's like, "Yeah, that's the new code." He goes, instead of 5/8 drywall or double layer 1/2 inch, they could. I forget what I think whatever the thickness of OSB was, but you can use OSB as a fire stop. I said, well, that's okay. So did you notice the doorways between the fire stops on that? They had scuttle doors between the fire stops so they could walk that catwalk to do maintenance.
I don't think I saw it at that point. It must have been before they started putting those in.
And
I just saw the catwalk, and I know it doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, to the roof itself. So even if you had a vent above it, now I don't know if that's a flat or not, but I know you can't reach down to get into that space. You get into the void space around it.
My point with it, those scuttle doors that they had, they're supposed to be spring loaded, so once you open them, they shut. Well, some of them, the springs were jammed, or there was no springs on them. So they're wide open. So yeah, there's a firewall here, but now you have a 3x3 opening so now there's no firewall there anymore. There's no fire protection.
Yeah, it's just welcoming trouble. And how much you want to bet, even if they fix those springs and everything, somebody's doing regular maintenance. There's a chalk under the door. Yeah, door's chalk.
Yeah, who's going to catch it? Because it's up in
nobody
in an attic space that the residents aren't going to go in. The fire marshal's not going to go in there after they give the C of O,
Right.
But it's a lumber yard up there.
That's a particularly interesting one. If you go to, vertically ventilate too, you kind of got to get it. And so now you got to play the wind a little bit, or at least really dial in your flow path because it's such a long space. It's not like, oh, I'm just going to go to the roof, try and guess above the fire. You kind of have to play the wind. You cut a hole and it turns out, well, the fire's still moving past it somewhere.
Right.
Now you really do need a target above or slightly downwind or whatever. It's the same thing for a residential house, I suppose, but you're trying not to let, in residential, you're trying not to let smoke travel too far horizontally before it goes vertical.
Yeah.
With this one, you just got that big old void space, no different than that doctor's office you're talking about. It's when you vertically ventilate and you start playing the wind. Yeah, okay, you might have opened a hole, but it's still moving past your hole now. Could have
Yeah.
something like that.
I mean, there was a fire that was out west of us, that strip plaza
Mm-hmm.
that started in the restaurant at the wood burning the oven on the out was it happened on the outside. They put the ashes on the outside of the because it was a pizza oven,
Yep.
and they did a trench cut on a peaked roof, and the trench cut saved half the building. I mean,
I think that's the first like successful one. Thank you. Yeah, that's it. That's the word in English. The first successful one I've seen at earlier stages of my career. We always talked about you learning in classes and all that other stuff, Fire One Academy, but that was the first time I actually saw that.
Well, they always talk about, in the academy, they always talk about trench cuts being on flat roofs. And this was I can't remember another, the city has done trench cuts, that they had that pretty good video from that. How many alarm fire was that where they had the Mayday?
I forget what it went.
I think they trench cut that one. I know they vented the crap out of that fire vertically. It was a flat roof, but you don't really hear of trench cuts on peaked roofs. And this trench cut saved half the building on that structure. I mean, saved 3 businesses. I mean, they were closed for a while from smoke damage and everything else, but half the structure had to get rebuilt. The other half had to just get cleaned up.
Yeah, a lot different than your big box stores where, you do a trench cut, save half the price. They're just going to bulldoze it anyways.
Yeah. I mean, everybody, like you reference like Taco Bell's, the fire insurance on those is for a rebuild, not for a renovation.
Right.
Yeah. How long was that Taco Bell closed?
Although our Taco Bell, I don't think they didn't completely demolish that, did they?
They did. Well, that's what I was going to say. How long?
That's the first one I've seen.
How long was that Taco Bell closed compared to, because they had to do a whole renovation on it, and they sunk a lot of money into it. I don't know why. It's a Taco Bell. Nothing got Taco Bell.
It was a very popular location.
Yeah, but I'm wondering, would it have been a faster rebuild if the place just got demolished and they just came in there and rebuilt the whole thing? Yeah. I mean, that thing was closed for months.
Wasn't it like almost a year? It was a very, very long time.
It could have been.
It was so long that people thought it was reopened and would, middle of the night, let's say party goers, would show up, banging on the door. You're not realizing there's not even, there's no kitchen appliances and stuff inside of it. They're looking because they thought it was open already. Like, hey, it's been long enough, because it really was a good location.
And they cut the roof on that one.
Yes, eventually we did. Yep.
Yeah, that was an odd one. I was like, was it traveling the insulation or
it did. So there was a layer. There was a void space between the ceiling. Man, it was, we'll have to. There's a lieutenant down at our main station. He was there because he ended up peeking his head up in there and go. It was a void space that had a huge layer of insulation. So when they originally poked holes to take a peek, they're like, "Oh, it's just insulation." They thought the roof was like directly above it. There ended up being a void space above that, like insulation. So the guys that went up to the roof didn't think anything of it. They're poking around. Yeah, I see nothing. Nothing's coming up. They made a couple inspection cuts. Yeah, no, nothing. Not realizing there's a huge void space, but then there was this thick layer of insulation.
And I remember
they ended up crawling up in there.
Yeah, I remember they knew they had fire. Fire was traveling because they had fire dripping out of the can lights.
Yes,
whatever was on fire was dripping out of the can lights on that one,
which was like underneath the insulation layer, so it was hard to catch. Looking at it all around, it wasn't. It's not like, oh, I can look down a shaft way or look down a void space and see it. So that was a wild one, and I don't remember if they ended up doing like some sort of trench or anything. Obviously, it's not large enough to do like a trench cut. But they did cut a portion of the hole. I don't know what method they used. You know, if it was just a 4x4, or if they made it a huge 8x8 or something.
You know, and just staying with the commercials and vertical ventilation, the plaza across the street where we had the pizza shop fire,
Mm-hmm.
and they cut the roof on that one, and that contained the fire right there. I mean, if they didn't cut that hole, that fire was going to travel the whole roof space because there was no fire stops. Because when I got in, I had the Delta exposures, and we started working on exposure 1, and we just worked our way down just to check the ceilings. And when we got in there, there was no fire stops, but the fire didn't travel because the truck company got up quick on the Charlie side of that structure where the bulk of the fire was, and cut a substantial hole in that roof, and it kept that fire from spreading. I mean, the engine company made a good push into there, and it was some questionable, not question on our dispatch, but the alarm came in at the next business over. So when they went into the business where the alarm came into, that wasn't where the fire was. The fire was in the next business over. I think that's how it was. This was years ago. But I do remember, because the only reason I remember is because the member that cut that hole was in the firehouse the other day. He just stopped in, dropped cookies off to us, enjoying retirement.
Nice.
And he cut that hole, and I remember he cut a big hole. You know, he did that by John Wayne, that one.
Oh, got lucky, I guess.
Yeah.
So moral of the story is don't write off vertical ventilation. There's a time to there's not a great guideline to just follow, and I think everybody's looking for a guideline on something. Departments that can't get out and train a lot, like I said, it's kind of it's a case of we're so split on our training because we only got a couple hours, right? That we break everything up: suppression, truck, vent, search. That we don't ever get enough time inside of 1 year to continuously piece it all together. We might do one drill where we piece it together. Okay, that's 3 evolutions. 3 evolutions for the entire year does not make something second nature, or organic rather. You know, whereas those that do have the more opportunities to train, we just piece it together, you know, automatically. So everything is organic. So when we say, especially up here in our region, hey, we like to vertically ventilate, it's not that we just go, oh, we got a fire, we're going to go straight to ventilation. It's habitual that we ventilate because we trust the other processes that are happening at the same time. Does that make more sense? It's not like, oh, do I choose the hand line or do I choose to ventilate today at this fire that just came in? So I think that's why it's more, we look at it as like, why wouldn't you ventilate? You know, or why wouldn't you vertically ventilate?
Yeah, I agree. And you know, my point is with the vertical ventilation on these peak roofs is some of these houses, there's nowhere else to ventilate. You get a fire in these 2.5s, 1.5s. I just go back to what I know. You know, you grew up in a Cape. I grew up in a Cape. There was one window on one end, another window on the other end, and that's not enough. That's not enough.
You have to ventilate that space because it's a death trap.
Yeah.
You
know, and then my first house that I bought with my wife, it was a 2.5-story Dutch Colonial, and the attic space had the eyelid. They're half circles. They're called eyelid windows. And there was one on one end and one on the other end. That was it.
We're talking the kind that when Clark Griswold got stuck in the attic and he's peeking out. One of those. Hey, and then watches the family drive away.
Yeah, I mean, but that's all there was. You know, and there were casement windows. There were crank casement open windows, so you could get some fresh air up there. But that's not enough to release the pressure if you have a substantial fire, especially on Division 2. That's, you know, propagating up to that half story on the 3rd floor. You know, same thing with the capes. Now, I'll go back to what I said in the beginning. Ranches probably don't need to vertically ventilate unless it gets up in that attic space. Then you got to vertically ventilate.
Right.
You know, the colonials, traditional 2-story colonial with an attic. You know, even on a 2nd floor good bedroom fire, it probably don't need to vertically ventilate until it gets up in an attic space. My issue is that some people, they listen to, very well respected firemen that go to a lot of fires. They do a lot of work, but they're not fighting fires in residential structures. And then they don't understand vertically ventilating peaked roofs. They're like, well, why don't you just take the windows? So, well, we did take the windows, or, the fire's not where the windows are. There's no windows to take, So I guess that's the most bothersome is you get the 4-letter departments out there that don't do it, and then it's gospel for everybody else. It's like, let's pump the brakes here. That's
a good point. Now they may have a reason for being so against it too, and that's not applicable to us. Another form of vertical ventilation that you can't say that necessarily that they don't vertically ventilate. Let's think about skyscraper or some huge tall freaking building, right? You have the stairwells, right? At the top of them, they have fans and everything. But it's an entire operation for one company to operate those fans, get up there, open and close doors in the stairwells. To them, that's maybe they're considering like, hey, if you're that's vertical ventilation. Well, that's also a completely different style of construction than anything that we have around here.
Yeah, I agree.
So we'll have to get somebody from one of those departments on here to give us their open forum. Let's hear it. What's the negatives? Give us your take. Let's have it. Let's learn something from it. May not change our mind, but we're definitely willing to hear it and see what works. How is it working for you to do something different? I love hearing contrast. All right, well, we'll wrap this thing up. Great first podcast here. Ventilation is a huge topic. I like discussing something like this first and getting it out there. Hey, this is what we're going to be about. Hopefully all our future podcasts are going to be similar. We'll pick a discussion or topic of discussion, hammer it out, and then we're going to eventually roll in some guests that, either be with us or against us on it. It's nice to pick each other's brains.
Well, that's good. Having different opinions on things is always a good thing. And just full disclosure, we both work on a truck company.
Yes, we do.
We're not going to shy away from engine topics. We got some guys that we're going to try to get on here that are they'll geek out on the engine thing, and I'll probably just shut my mouth and listen to what he's got to say, and I might throw a couple jabs at him. But
we're just
good at what they do.
Truck week here at the academy, and that we teach at, and next week this is the first time where they did engine week after truck week, and I actually kind of appreciate that because tomorrow is their last day, and the wrap up for it will be, and I'm sure it's going to shock everybody that's thinks that we're totally all about trucks. Hey, this whole job is about or at least our role in this job is about setting them up for success. There's a handful of other things that go along with it, but really if we don't get in there and help them out, it's only going to make their job harder. Yeah. And like you said at the very, very beginning, the most important task on the fire ground is getting water on that fire. So ventilation is a big key to that. That's, again, supporting them. We're turning the AC on for them. We're clearing their vision, whatever we can do to make it easier for them.
100%. 100%.
So with that, we'll see everybody on the next one. In the meantime, be safe.
Yep. See ya.